how did you end up in local government though? Was that something that you wanted to do, or?
Oh, it was a job. It was just a job. I went to, I grew up in the Bay Desert area, went through all my schooling there, so finished high school, had no real desire to go to university at that stage, and I put in for a couple of jobs around town. One of those was the council. I was interviewed at the local furniture store, like a local Harvey Norman type store, a couple of weeks earlier, and a good mate of mine got that job. We both put in for the same jobs. He got that one, and I was interviewed for the council and got the job with the council as a junior clerical officer in the engineering section, December 1974. And I had no real, it was just a job, that's all. It was something, earn some money and no career plans. I was only a 17-year-old, of course, so you don't think too far ahead. And I was just fortunate. There were a few people in there, younger managers, who were studying towards their local government clerk certificate, and they said, "Fergie, you should have a crack at this." And so I had a look at it, and started my external studies, and that's where it went from there.
So was there any particular, like, during your career, people that kind of you looked up to, role models, or?
The people you learn from, I don't think I have any role models. Like I mentioned, those few managers who were there at the time, and they all became shire clerks down the track. That was their career path, and so they gave me the inspiration, I suppose. Derm Stowers, but I went from Bay Desert. Keith Jucky was the shire clerk at Bay Desert, very, very formal and straight. And then to Logan. When Logan first started, I was one of their first employees, and I lasted about 18 months, 16 months at Logan, because I wasn't really learning anything new. And I went up to Jeringa Shire, where Derm was the shire clerk. And if anything, I learned from Derm that you can be a human being as well as being the boss. But it was such a different atmosphere to work in. What he and the chairman of the day achieved with development of mining town of Blackwater set the benchmark for mining towns across that Bowen Basin. So they were very smart operators. He did teach me that you could still be a human being as well as being the boss of an organisation. And I really hadn't seen that before. So I took that with me. Derm actually witnessed my signature on my local government clerk certificate. And then I was thinking about mentors the other day, because I had to do a leadership presentation to school teachers, managers at one of the schools here in Bundaberg, and I think my mentors were more the mayors that I work with, because they come from their own backgrounds and you learn so much from talking to them, and they have their insight into local government and how the issues should be dealt with or could be dealt with. And I always have a lot of respect and time for those mayors that I've worked with. So I think not so much role model, but mentors. Yeah. I can call up any of those mayors now and have a conversation with them, and if I have issues, run it past them. It's a good network to have. So.
Anyone a standout?
Ron Bellingham down at Warwick was a visionary. He'd be the true visionary that I worked with. He was a very successful business person in his own right. Only a little bloke, Ron, but this big booming voice when he needed to use it. That in his role as mayor, I worked with Ron for 8 years, first as CEO of Warwick Shire and then CEO of Southern Downs after amalgamation. And Ron would say to me, I reckon every year at performance appraisal time, and we had Brett DeChastel used to facilitate that for us, so Ron would say, Rod, I don't always agree with the way you go about doing things. In other words, I'm a very quiet operator and I work with people. I don't yell, I don't abuse, whatever. But he said, you seem to achieve the outcomes that I'm after, so I'm happy to let you go about doing things the way you want to do them. And that was just respect from Ron that, I in my own way, I was doing what he wanted the CEO to do, which was very different to the way he operated in his own business. So Ron was a visionary amongst those leaders. Anne Baker at Isaac is just such a strong lady. I did 12 months up there, and as Anne would say, I just want you to calm the farm, Rod, because they've been through an awful time. And in 12 months, we did a lot of good things in that council. Still keep in touch with Anne. She's a strong lady. Yeah, she's just a worker, tireless worker. And then Andrew Wilcox, when I went to Whitsundays, one of the reasons I stepped out of doing the part-time contract, I'd spent 6 years doing locum work, as I call it, and some consultancy work from contract work. But one of the attractions of Whitsundays was to work with Andrew Wilcox, such a solid, honest operator. dealings with him when I was working. I did 6 months with LGAQ. So Mark Leyland went on extended leave, some sick leave, and they asked me to handle that helpline that Mark used to look after. So I did it from home. I get an email from LGAQ saying Andrew Wilcox, Wet Sundays, wants to have a chat. And he was deputy mayor at the time, and we got to know each other over those 6 months because he's a regular caller. So I was quite happy to take on the role at Wet Sundays in a full-time capacity again. Enjoyed it greatly, and then of course what happens? He goes and gets elected to federal parliament 12 months out from my contract expiry, and the world shifted greatly. But yeah, I really enjoyed working with Andrew. He was a modern day leader, I suppose I'd call him. Again, he had a vision for his region. Honesty and integrity was vital to him. Cross that line and you lost his trust. Yeah, you can name off any number of people, but they're probably the three that stand out.
On amalgamations, would you say that was one of the lowlights in your career or a highlight?
Look, it's a big part of my career. It's interesting. I went from Bow Desert Shire to Logan because Logan was created. I look back on it. Logan was created from taking, I'll call the top half of Albert Shires and Bow Desert Shire to form Logan. It was Logan Shire when I worked there for those 16 months. And I look back and I think, early in my career, I worked with the council that came from nowhere because we moved into this office and there wasn't even stationery. Furniture hadn't arrived, the pencils and pens hadn't arrived. Significant thing to be involved in, but at the time I just didn't appreciate it. It was just a job opportunity. But then amalgamations come along. I thoroughly enjoyed the challenge of bringing those two organisations together, Warwick and Stanthorpe, but culturally so different. Both councils in that pre-amalgamation process, Triple S program, had put their submissions into the Commissioner and said, look, we don't disagree with amalgamations, but whatever you do, do not simply join Warwick and Stanthorpe. Bring in Inglewood to the west or Clifton to the north or both. And in the end, we're sitting there at that meeting in Brisbane that day and looking at the map and thinking they've gone and joined Warwick and Stanthorpe. So from an organisational perspective, a lot of work and a lot of success, but from a political perspective, absolute disaster. No other word for it. Performance review. Brett Chastel phoned me. He's been engaged at my first completed 12 months as CEO of Southern Downs. Things are going pretty well in my mind. Had the staff working well together, and Brett phones me about 6 o'clock one evening and said, blah, blah, blah. And I said, everything's okay. And he said, well, could be some problems. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, out of a score of 7, he said, I have some councillors marking you with 4s, other ones marking you with 0s. And I said, 0s? How can they mark 0s? And he said, Rod, you could be Superman and they still wouldn't want you in that role. In other words, this stupid Stanthorpe Warwick politics getting in the way of how I was perceived to have done my job as CEO. That's the part I did not enjoy at all about post-amalgamation. And so Ron Bellingham did that first 4 years as Mayor of Southern Downs. I believe Ron, if he could have retired after 12 months without causing a by-election, he would have pulled the pin because the politics just blew him away. He just didn't know what was coming. And after 4 years, he stood down, and then we had Peter Blundell came in as Mayor, and I just said to Peter, I had a contract renewal coming up in 7 months. I said, I don't believe Council will renew this contract, so let's deal with it now if we can. And he said, I thought we'd have some time to sort that out. And I said, well, I don't see the sense. If you're not going to renew it in 7 months' time, let's just finish it. And that's what we did. We finished it. I had some health issues in that time, and I came out of the blue, completely out of the blue, and I still put it down to that internal stress from trying to understand how they can score my performance so poorly when the organisation was running so sweetly. It's all about politics. Anyway, I finished that. That was 2012, so a long time ago now. And then the best part, and I can slip in this one, the best part was I was then appointed by the state to lead the de-amalgamation of Mareeba Shire. and that was the best 12 months
Really?
of my career. Fascinating job.
Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating. Ian Church, CEO of Tablelands, from day one opened the doors and said, right, we need to make the best of this for both councils. So he and I worked very well together. Compared to other, what we call ourselves, transfer managers was our title. I don't know what that was all about, but anyway, the other CEOs or councils weren't as open in dealing with those transfer managers.
Was Peter Franks at Mariba then?
Well, no, Peter was actually doing the de-amalgamation of Noosa Shire at the time.
Okay.
So Peter did Noosa, Graham Konofsky did Livingston, and a guy, Jeff, from South Australia did Douglas. I can't think of Jeff's name.
I should have
But
known.
Mariba, so we had Ian Church and myself, we were the decision makers. Ian appointed Brett de Chastel, as it turns out, to manage it from the Tablelands perspective. I was fortunate, Alan Lambert was working with Tablelands, and I'd known Alan for some time. Ian had offered Alan to assist me, and but the four of us just worked so well together, and really positive outcome. And then thankfully Peter Franks applied for Mariba, and they employed him. And they were very, very fortunate at Mariba. They had an exceptionally strong political team. Tom Gilmore as mayor, so he'd been state minister in Borbidge government, and he was the first mayor of Tablelands Council. So really good operator, Tom, strong leader. And then they engaged Peter, and Peter's still there, obviously. What's that? 9 years ago, we opened the doors. So, but that job. I didn't have a council above me. I reported to the DG of the department of the day, Craig Evans, who sadly passed away 5 years ago now, I think, Craig. And we're just left to our own, basically, to bring that new organisation, or that old organisation, bring it back to life. Staff had no guarantee of job. Compared to amalgamations where you're guaranteed work for 3 years, there was nothing like that with de-amalgamation. And Mariba was fortunate. All their finance team, they were still based in the Mariba office. None of them wanted to go and work for Tablelands. They wanted to stay there. So Dave Dott, Jen McCarthy and her team were there, and it just worked so well for Mariba, and Tablelands suffered politically then. They had a few problems for a couple of years. But it was just it was an end product to that role. Mariba Shire had to open the doors on January 2, and it had to work. Everything had to be as if it had been open on Friday afternoon, open that Monday morning, whatever it was. All your computer systems, everything had to work just like it was the week before. And it did.
Yeah.
So that was really that's a very satisfying role that I had, that de-amalgamation. Look back on that as very fond memories of Mariba and the people up there. Yeah. And we had to actually engage an accounting firm to recreate the cash books. So go back to the day of amalgamation. What did Mariba Shire have? What did the other councils have? Because there were, 4 or 5 councils amalgamated, right? So that's your starting point, and then where'd the rates come from? Where'd the money go to? What plant did you have? I think our spreadsheet had about 400 tasks sitting on it. Yeah, it's just a fascinating task to undertake. I remember at the interview, Craig Evans said, "What do you think the biggest risk is?" And I said, "Everything." I couldn't pinpoint one particular thing in my mind. It's got to be done, obviously. So, and at that stage, there were no rules or regulations about how it was going to happen. The methodology hadn't been released. Minister Crisafulli, we met him a few times throughout that, but right at the very beginning, after we'd all been appointed, we had a day in Brisbane, and Crisafulli comes in and he closes by saying, "Gentlemen, your reputation hinges on the success of this project. Make sure you do it right." And I think we all got a good outcome out of those projects. I look at it, and I originally was offered Douglas Shire. I said, "Yeah, I'm happy." I said, "Any of them will do." I was just looking for work again, and then they phoned me back, the recruitment company, a couple of days later, and said, "Would I mind taking Mariba?" Because in hindsight, it was the best one I could have taken because of that relationship with Ian Church. Ian just, he would say to his staff, "The village has spoken. We're de-amalgamating. Let's get on with it and do it well, so we get the best of both counts." And that Just I could walk into their office in Tableland. I didn't need an appointment. I could just walk in. They had an office space for me. I could talk to staff. I was just so lucky to have Ian Church and Brett up there and Alan Lambert. Yeah, we had a good time.
So would you say one of the things that worked for you as a CEO or in your career has been having those relationships, like, you know, building up the trust with people?
Thinking about that this week, just what questions you might throw up, and I indicated before I'm a quiet operator. I'm not a CEO who will be leading the bandwagon out there. And I look back on the councils I stepped into as CEO, Warwickshire, Isaac, Whitsundays, Mareeba de-amalgamation. Those councils all had issues that needed dealing with. At an organisational level, there was failings. And I think my strength in leading organisations is making them better organisations, building confidence within the organisation, confidence of the staff that they're doing the right thing and they can make mistakes and they won't be in any serious trouble unless they deserve it, of course. We took it back to 101 of local government. You know, we're here to service our community. No rocket science involved. We know what the legislation is. Let's just get on with it and look after our customers. And so by the time I finished, Isaac would engage Gary Stevenson. You know, Gary stayed his 5 years. Great outcome, but part of the role I had was to hold the organisation down, but also put out the public image that we've been doing a lot of work and making it a better organisation than what it was before. So I think my strength lies in understanding people, listening to people. It's very important that we listen to people, you know, empathising, but also making sure there's clear direction. Yeah, I do it on a subtle way. I had a director in Warwick once, my performance review, we did a 360 peer review as well, and one of them said that I delegated too much, and I had a fair idea which one it was. So at our next ELT meeting, I'd shared with them what the outcomes of the performance review were and some of the feedback, and one of the comments I made was, you know, someone thinks that I delegate too much. Well, just get used to it. Oh, look, if you're the guru, if you're the planning director or the finance director, you're the guru on it. I'll gladly pass it on. I'll back you to the hilt. But that's your job. You do it. It's not my job to prepare the financial statement. That's your job. You just go and do it. I'll sign the piece of paper at the bottom at the end of the day. So I think that's my strength. It's understanding people and getting the best out of people that you can.
That's fantastic. And I imagine that your staff were every time you would leave, move on, your staff were probably quite upset about that.
Yes, yeah. And it's always humbling to have people say, you know, you're the best CEO we've ever come across. I sometimes think, am I too soft? But it's not that. It's just when I left with Sundays, because they had multiple offices, we had several morning tea send-offs. And at Proserpine, 3 of the IT ladies, I had very little to do with the IT ladies except when something goes wrong. But 3 of them walked up and thanked me, shook my hand and said, you're the best CEO we've ever had. That's beautiful. I was talking to my PA, Nikki, and I said, I can't work that out because in the 3 years I've had here, I might have spent half an hour total with them. And she said, Rod, it's the little things. You walk past them in the morning when you come in the Crossy office and you say good morning to them. I don't do it on purpose. It's just manners. There you go, good morning. And that was enough for them to think I'm a decent leader.
Your reputation across the industry was always incredibly high. A lot of respect across the sector.
I don't get in trouble.
No, but it's more than that. It's more than that.
Oh, yeah, I know, but the organisations that I led, it's important to me that they are seeing that they're an honest organisation, that we don't get in trouble, that we follow the rules. Certainly we can be innovative and step outside those rules where it's legal and allowed and it will generate some positive benefits. But it's always clear. I always go into an organisation, the first thing I do when meeting all the staff is to share my values with them. And it's something I learned a long time ago. I did a program called Building Rural Leaders Program, actually run by the DPI back then. So this is back during Gin days, so mid-90s. And it ran over 8 months, 6 weeks, 1 week at a time over 8 months. And it was the best learning that I went through in all my career. Learned so much from that program. But one of the things they emphasised was understanding what your values are and then how you share that in your workplace. And so with each organisation I went to after that, I would share my values with staff. And it was really powerful. And every 12 months then I'd go back at least and reiterate those values. And sometimes they'd change and the order of priority would change. Like safety wasn't there in the early days, but as safety became more important, risk management popped in. Ultimately, safety was always number one. I want you to arrive home safe every night. Honesty, the quickest way out the door in this organisation is you be involved in fraud or corruption, dishonesty. Just don't do it. So there's a clear message with all my staff from day one that this is what my expectations are as CEO. You abide by it while you're here and you won't have any problems. And every organisation I stepped into over that first 12 months, you would always see that subtle change flow through the organisation. Staff inductions, same thing, once a month, staff inductions, here we go. These are my values. And they generally align pretty close with the values of the organisation, but it was also important that they knew what any extras that I had. Customer satisfaction to me was always a big one. Whether your customer are ratepayers out there or whether your customers, you're an IT person and your customers are internal in the organisation, you treat them the way you'd like to be treated. Simple stuff. We did a leadership program at Whitsundays and our quarry manager really come into management meetings and he's one of these guys who'd always sit in the back, wouldn't offer too much. And I had a number of conversations with him, very intelligent operator. So he had a team of about 6-7 people out of the quarry. We ran a commercial quarry just north of Proserpine. And he took, from that leadership program, he took the values of the organisation and put them up on the back wall of the smoko room and started talking about them, how much they meant to him. These are our values. Sharing values is such a powerful tool. And as I said, I've made use of it now for probably 20 years. And whether I stepped into an organisation for 3 months as CEO or as a director, I'd do the same thing there. It was just important to me. I'm there and employed in a role. And if I have to make some tough decisions, I want them to know why I'm making those tough.
Yeah. What do you think the best thing about having a local government career, whether it's as a CEO or an officer, what do you think?
Oh, the people. Look, there are some exceptionally talented people, professional people, non-professionals, but exceptionally talented people who somehow fall into local government. And I think that's because there is this community service culture to local government in that they can play a part in their community. A lot of the professionals, the engineers, especially engineers these days, could go out and make a lot more money if they wanted to, but local government gives them a sense of achievement, I think. Worked with an engineer in Warwick, and he'd come from public service to Warwickshire. He'd been involved in some big projects in the Brisbane City area. And I said to him, how come you finished up here? And he said, when you're involved in those big projects with public service, you could be doing design work which mightn't happen for 10, 15 years. You might never see it happen, but in local government, you do design work on a water and sewerage program. And he said, within a couple of years, you'll actually see that constructed in the ground, turn the tap and the water's flowing. And he said, you feel good about that. So I think the people have always been the strength and my reason for hanging around local government. And that, to a fair degree as well, the elected members, most of them have been very dedicated, genuine people for their community. So that to me is the key of local government, it's the people.
So the last question is, what advice would you give to newcomers and prospective local government CEOs?
To newcomers to the industry, get out of that southeast corner. It's the biggest challenge I've seen in the last 20 years is attracting people to regional local government. That's not even talking about Western local government, it's talking about regions outside of the southeast corner. And I understand there are family reasons and professional reasons why that doesn't always happen these days. But one of the blessings I had in my career was all pre-amalgamations. And I've gone from Beaudesert to Logan to Juringa to Laidley to Kalanshire at Gin over a space of about 12, 13 years, and got broad experience from each of those councils, and CEO, Shire Clerk, CEO at Kalanshire, Gin. It's difficult now to do that because you don't have those small councils to jump into unless you do jump out west. But you can learn so much in stepping out of the organisation you're currently in. I appreciate there are people in the southeast corner who, they're working for Logan one day and then next week they're working for Moreton Bay because it's an hour's drive each way, and next time they're down working on the Gold Coast. That's all experience, and I think that's first up. My advice would be keep your eyes open, look for opportunities, and don't be afraid to step out of your comfort zone and take on a new role that will give you some new knowledge and skills. For CEOs, I think the biggest thing I can say to new CEOs is around those values again. Make sure that your staff members understand what your values are, and then make sure you live by those values. So there's no sense saying that you expect honesty if you yourself go and do something a bit stupid. As a leader, you must set the example and live by that example. The old T-shirt, what you have on the front of your shirt and what you have in the back of the shirt. Too many times you see people say, well, I'm going to go and straighten this out, and on the back of their shirt it says, maybe on Monday. Those sort of people who make all the noise but don't actually do. They don't walk, they just talk it. So the values, so important, but make sure your staff know about those values and then live by them. Pretty simple.
So how many years all up for you in terms of your career in local government and your career as a CEO?
48. Yeah, I started in December 74 and I finished in March 23 and really didn't stop. I had little gaps here and there, a few months here. It was surprising when I was doing that locum type work that the phone calls kept coming. I could leave an organisation and go home. Bev would always travel with me. We saw a lot of Queensland doing that locum type work. If anything, it is one thing. I always looked when I was doing full-time council work, up until I finished at Southern Downs in 2012. So I was 55 when I finished at Southern Downs, 56. In the back of my mind, I was always going to retire at 60. But that was the best thing that happened to me, that parting of ways with Southern Downs, because I then spent the next 5 or 6 years, the de-amalgamation, working at Isaac. Then I worked at wherever we go, Charters Towers, Hinchinbrook. Went back to Isaac on an annual basis for 3 or 4 weeks when Gary would take leave. They'd always get me back. Emerald Shire, did some consultancy work for Barkey. I earned reasonable money in that time. I certainly wasn't under any political stress because I was only in places for a short period of time. So you deal with the councillors, but you'd always know that you're out the door in 6 months' time or 4 months' time. And what it really did in hindsight, when I started at Whit Sundays, I felt refreshed. It was quite surprising. I really enjoyed the role, getting back into the CEO's role again on a permanent basis. If you'd asked me 5 years earlier, I was offered the role at Isaac, I was offered the role at Hinchinbrook, I was offered role wherever I went to. They say, you sure you don't want the job? And Mareeba Shire, I'd say no, I've had enough of the rubbish, the political rubbish. But by the time I'd had that 5 or 6 years of doing the locum work, I really enjoyed the next 3 doing full-time work. So my advice to any CEOs who have been around for a while, give that a go. Have a break, do something different for 3 or 4 years. Recharge your batteries. The industry is losing too many skilled people too early. A lot of my peers did retire late 50s, early 60s, and they say to me, how come you're still working? And I said, well, I'm enjoying it. I left Whit Sundays and I was still physically healthy, still mentally healthy. I could have worked there for another couple of years. I just didn't want to. I'd had enough. 66, I just had enough. Simple as that. But because I'd had that break of 5 or 6 years, it really did mean that I went into it with a fresh mind and fresh ideas. So if there's advice not only to newcomers but to those who've been in the game for a while, give the alternative a go and just share your knowledge and skills with other organisations. It's good. I enjoyed that part of it. I look back very fondly on those times, and as I said, my wife Bev and I we'd both go to those regions, and you'd see, you become a tourist on the weekend because you got a chance to drive around up to the Tablelands, down to Cairns, you live at Ingham, so you can look at the beautiful countryside. It's just a magic time we had. It wouldn't have, look, the whole thing, Bev and I have been married now for 43 years. Yeah, 43 years. Been there by my side the whole time. That's certainly, I've got to say, that's she's been my godsend, and she's there in the good times and the bad times. We've been through a hell of a lot, so that helps as well. Yeah,
That's
there you go.
Oh, thank you so much. Look, I really appreciate your time today.
That's all right.
And it's just wonderful hearing about your career. I just hope one day I can say some amazing things like you have today or shared today with somebody and feel as proud as what, you should be feeling.
I think it was opportune when they asked me, do you have anyone in mind who might do the interview? And my old mate Ian Flint, I know Flinty started the process with LGMA, but you just sent that email through a couple of weeks earlier. Yeah, and you made mention of that Long Reach conference, and I said to him at LGMA, Kim Driver's the one. There you go.
Oh, thank you. That's that makes me
what
feel
a way to close it out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, good. Okay.
Thank you.